I could not be more shocked at the result of Miss International 2022 if I tried. Miss International 2022 was crowned today and the results were unexpected. I will definitely tell you that one for free. First of all, speaking of free, you had to pay to watch Miss International 2022, which it doesn't really sit right with me. I mean, I know they've been gone for 2 years and they have to make up for those 2 years. But you know, there are other international pageants in the world that simply made do and, you know, used what they could to give a show. Whereas Miss International was just like, we're not doing it. And now they have to financially make up for that by making you pay 1,000 yen on their website to watch the show. And I'm just not about that. So needless to say, I was not watching legally. I was also watching from the comfort of my bed, which is why I'm not doing an official reaction or whatever. The thing was happening at 7 a.m. in Namibia, okay? In my defense, it was happening at 2 p.m. in Japan, which, what a weird and random time to have a pageant at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. But it was at 7 p.m. in Namibia. I just woken up. There was no way that I was gonna go do a whole reaction. I was wanting to stay ugly and just wanting to watch Miss International. The production was surprisingly good. They started off with national costume, which bothered me a bit because they had every single contestant coming out in national costume. And for me, I just feel like so much effort and money and time and forethought is put into national costume that it shouldn't be part of the final show. It should have its own dedicated thing. Because at the final show, I didn't feel like the national costumes necessarily get the hype and attention that they deserve. And I mean, usually when they use national costume for final shows, and not only Miss International, but a lot of international pageants do this, they use the national costumes to introduce the countries. And I sort of feel like that's a bit disrespectful, because introductions don't last as long as, say, you would have at Miss Universe during their official national costume competitions. The costumes really get the spotlight and attention that they deserve, and I don't feel like that's the case when you are just using the costumes to introduce the contestants. The girls not getting the spotlight enough during NatCast is the same problem that I had with the evening gown that came after that, the evening gown competition. They also had the girls, and this is such a pet peeve of mine in pageantry, they had the girls coming out 2 by 2 next to each other. And all 66 contestants got to do gown as well. And I'm just like, this is what prelims are for. You should have a preliminary gown competition where each girl still gets to have their moments. Having all of the contestants do gown, but like in a half-hearted 2 by 2 walking next to each other, getting like 3 seconds in a spotlight type of way, it's not good. It's not fun to watch. You don't get to really see the contestants and get to see the nuances of their performances. I just do not like that. And then afterwards, it was announced that the judges were going to be choosing the top 15. And, you know, usually at other pageants, the finalists, the top 15, 20, whatever it is usually determined way before finals happens, like about a couple of hours at least before finals happen. So I was surprised to learn that the judges were having to choose to still tabulate scores for the top 15 at finals, because they, like I said, there are 66 contestants. Of course, there are also other scores that feed into who get to make top 15. For example, there was a preliminary swimsuit competition, and I suppose other things that also fed into that. But really, it was interesting to me to see that they were still tabulating for the top 15 at finals. And I also must add, unrelated to gowns and the pageant pageant itself. The band that they had, this like really cool rock band, that band really hit. I actually enjoyed their performance so much. It was so cool. And I was so confused because when it came time to announce the top 15 finally, they had the girls coming out in swimsuits. So these poor women had to get into their evening gowns and then they had to get into their swimsuits again. And these were the same swimsuits, by the way, that they did their preliminary swimsuit competition in. And they had no swimsuit performance. Each group, they were divided into continental groups, by the way. So Americas, Europe, Oceania, Asia, and of course Africa. They all came out in their swimsuits and just stood there waiting to be called into the top 15. Or not, unfortunately. And why not keep the girls in evening gown? So many questions, because later on the girls actually had to get back into their evening gowns, you know. So for the top 15, it ended up being France, Finland, Germany, Philippines, and Cape Verde. Also New Zealand, Peru, Jamaica, Costa Rica, and Canada, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Spain, who else? UK, and Northern Marianas. And there were some girls in there that I expected. For example, I had Germany in my top, of course, Colombia, Peru. I had like 7 girls in my top. So at the end of the day, I got 7 out of 15 of the top 15, which is kind of low if you look at my track record at international pageants. I was especially not expecting Northern Marianas, New Zealand and Finland to make it. But especially shocking was the fact that Mexico, Venezuela, Vietnam and who else was it? India did not make the top 15, and that was very surprising to me, especially Mexico, because I think she was like my second runner-up in my prediction. Also, there was no Namibia and South Africa, and I felt so bad yesterday making my official prediction because I did leave them out, although I did do a little honorable mention for them and some other girls in the beginning, including Canada, who actually made top 15. She was in my honorable mentions yesterday. But for Namibia and South Africa, I felt so bad because in my heart of hearts I knew that they weren't going to make it, so I didn't add them to my top 15, although I do love them. And it gets so awkward sometimes, guys, because not only in South Africa but in Namibia as well, where I live in Namibia, the pageant industry is so small. The pageant community is really tiny, and so for most of the girls that go to represent Namibia overseas, chances are I've met them and interacted with them, and it pains me so much when I don't get to add my country to my official prediction, because I have sort of a foresight for what's going to happen. And sometimes it pains me so much, but I just can't put someone if I do not realistically, see it happening. And it's hard sometimes, but I have to stay honest because I just feel like, you can't be just putting people on the list just because you have some sort of sentimental attachment to them. And I do have a lot of sentimental attachment to a lot of women that I often don't end up putting on my list. So it pained me to see my birth country, South Africa, and my home country, Namibia, not in the top 15. But it didn't surprise me, unfortunately. Then they did have a top 15 swimsuit competition. I still do not think that having the girls in gown and doing gown and then having them do swimsuit and then having them get back in their gowns, I still don't think that was warranted. But there was a top 15 swimsuit competition, and for me, the standouts of the swimsuit competition was really Peru and Dominican Republic. Nobody else really stand out to me. In fact, I don't know how some of the girls, and I'm not gonna name any names, but I don't know how some of the girls actually got into the top 15 through their walks. By the way, guys, the pageant had so many unnecessary things as well. Like, it was a whole 2 hours into the show before there was even any mention of the top 15 and announcing the top 15, and I really hate that. Oh my goodness, if you guys watched my Miss Earth reaction the other day, oh guys, I die. I was so happy that I could do this in the comfort of my bed, because really just all of these unnecessary things, like seriously, 2 hours before we get to the meet, which is top 15 announcement. And for me, this is really why Miss Universe is still the #1 pageant in my opinion, because Miss Universe is so industrialized. It is so, what would be a good way to say this? Miss Universe is streamlined to retain audiences. That's why I love watching Miss Universe. There are very few unnecessary segments when it comes to Miss Universe, and that's why Miss Universe is still the #1 pageant in my opinion. Pageants honestly shouldn't go on longer than 2.5 hours max. But anyway, then we had the top 8, which consisted of the Dominican Republic, as well as Cape Verde, Germany, Jamaica, Colombia, Spain, Canada, and Peru. And surprisingly, for myself as well as a lot of other people, Philippines actually didn't make it into the top 8. But I did manage to get 4 out of 8 of the top 8. I feel like there were a lot of non-placements this year that were really shocking, and a lot of placements that, to me, you know, as a fan, having followed pageantry as a whole for a long time, not necessarily hyper focusing on Miss International, but, you know, many pageants. I mean, these 6 are like the holy grail of pageants for me, and I follow all of them religiously. I must say that this year the placements at Miss International were really weird, like strange, and not necessarily the placements, but the misplacements. You know, I know that sometimes we all get a bit caught up in the hype of a certain contestant or country, and call it sash factor if you like, but you know, sometimes there's just something strange about non-placements at a pageant. It was giving Miss Universe 2020, if you know what I mean. The top 8 got to do speeches to do with their advocacy and what they stand for. And I must say, Jamaica's speech was so touching. It was so touching. It melted my little ice heart. I adored Jamaica after her speech because she is autistic, and of course people with autism don't get a lot of representation, especially in the pageant industry. So for her to come up there and just speak like that, she's just incredible, and she just melted my heart. The authenticity radiating from her was absolutely incredible. I would love to see more of this in the industry. That absolute, pure, unadulterated sincerity that Jamaica had. Peru, I felt, was very authentic as well, giving her speech. She did stumble a little bit, but to me it just felt like Peru definitely had the sincerity and the heart as well that we saw from Jamaica. Then we also had Continental Queens crowned, and Continental Queens I think is really interesting because at Miss International the Continental Queens get voted for by other contestants in their group. So of course the continents at Miss International are Africa, the Americas, so North and South America combined, Europe as well as Asia, and then Oceania, which is like Australia and co, you know. And for me, I felt it was so interesting that the Miss International organization allowed the contestants to vote for the Continental Queens, because I feel like it's sort of a Miss Congeniality-esque thing. It's a nice thing, and I really like that. So the Continental Queen for Asia was Japan, which of course is also the home country. For Africa, it was Cape Verde, who's a big favorite at the competition this year. Keep in mind at this point she was also still part of the top 8. For Europe, it was Finland. For Oceania, it was New Zealand. And for the Americas, the Continental Queen is the USA. And then there were also some other awards like the National Costume Award, which went to Uzbekistan. And I must just say, this woman reminds me so much of Khloe Kardashian, but like, you know, 5 years ago Khloe. Then Best in Swimsuit went to the UK. Best in Evening Gown went to Peru, which of course I I absolutely understand because I love Peru. If you didn't know from my prediction, I adore Peru. And then lastly, the Photogenic Award went to Ecuador. And then finally, it was time to announce the top 5. And of course, at this point, we were all feeling the anxiety. The 4th runner-up ended up being the Dominican Republic, which I thought I was on the right track because I had the Dominican Republic in my official prediction as well. The 3rd runner-up was Colombia. Colombia was actually my 1st runner-up in my prediction. The 2nd runner-up, and this is where my heart broke, was Peru, because Peru, of course, was my winner. And at this point, there were a couple of girls left on the stage, and I'm not going to lie, I was kind of hoping at this point that it would be Jamaica that would win, since she did touch me so much during her speech. The 1st runner-up was Cape Verde, which I'm always happy for a big milestone accomplishment for Africa, even though Cape Verde for me on my list was at number 9. And then it was time to announce the winner, and at this point it was Spain, Germany, Canada and Jamaica left on stage. I actually thought in my heart that it should probably be Jamaica because she did touch me so much. I know I keep saying this, but this woman is so touching and so authentic and so incredible, and I truly thought that she deserved the win. But in my mind, you know, in my brain, I thought that they would probably give it to Canada is what I thought, because she wasn't in my prediction actually, but she was in my honorable mentions. I did see something strong in Canada as well, and I did think that she fit in pretty well to the Miss International thing that they have. I also didn't know much about Canada, so I didn't know whether or not she had competed before, whatever. But what ended up happening was that Germany was crowned Miss International 2022. At this point, I was speechless because Germany was literally barely in my prediction. She was my number 15. So she was technically there, but she was on the complete other side of the spectrum that she ended up being for me. I thought this was very interesting because from what I know about Germany, of course, if she looks oddly familiar to you, there's a reason. She competed at Miss Supranational in July. You know, the one where Lalela Mswane from South Africa won. Yes, she competed there. If you don't remember seeing her in the finals, it's because she didn't make the finals. The woman who won Miss International 2022 competed barely 6 months ago at another pageant. Technically, a smaller and newer pageant, which by many isn't even considered a major pageant, and she didn't even place. So that was interesting to me. I will never say that someone doesn't deserve to win, because of course at every single pageant there are different categories of things that the people at that pageant, the organizers, are looking for, the judges are looking for. And I always say this, different day, different goal. But for Germany to, you know, jump so high, for her to actually make such great progress that in the span of 6 months she can go from not placing at a smaller international pageant to winning one of the biggest international pageants in the world, that's interesting. I suppose a more optimistic person would say that's impressive. And it is. It's confusing as well. You know, I'm not trying to be negative, but it's perplexing. I'm gonna put her picture anyway, but interesting. Anyway, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Well, let me know what you thought about Miss International 2022. You know what? I don't know if I'm completely satiated, to be honest with you. But it was an interesting journey, nonetheless. And I would love to know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!